Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step off the train and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a blustery, glasses freezing kind of day here in suburban Chicago. I'm getting the full effect of the January wind chill on my face as I talk to you while I walk home from another day teaching about zombies. Today begins a march of progress toward the last episode of the season. And that march of progress is an exciting reveal. Well, I think it's exciting. That very long-time listeners might have expected. Here it comes, that's right. It's time for my new and updated top 50 list. For those of you who haven't been listening to the podcast for more than 2 years, every 2 years I update my top 50 list. I originally made my top 50 list in 2015, I think. And then I made it as a geek list in 2017. And then in 2019, I updated it. And now I'm updating it at the end of 2021, the beginning of 2022. So it's been about 2 years since I updated it. And it's going to be interesting to talk to you about what stayed, what's gone, what the list is. So here's how it's going to work. Today I'm going to talk to you about the creation of the list and a few of the changes you can expect. And then over the next 8 episodes, I'm going to talk to you about what the current status of the list is. I'll do a count up, starting with game 50 and ending with game 1. And my plan is to, hopefully this won't be too much of a spoiler, but one would hope that a top 50 list isn't an entirely new collection of games, but rather a refinement of a collection that you already had. So in other words, my top 50 list, many of the games that are on it were on it last time I did this. Now, some of you may not have been listening 2 years ago, but all of our episodes are archived at rattleboxgames.com or over at Spreaker, which is where we host our podcast. You should be able to find them through your podcast listening device. And so you could go back to December or January of 2017, 2018 and listen to my previous top 50, which I think I did in the more conventional manner of talking about the games and why I like them. My plan this time around, when I get into the actual top 50, is going to be to talk about the games by talking about one thing I really like about them. So like my favorite thing. Jamie Stegmaier has a series on YouTube where he does his favorite mechanism from game X. It's going to be sort of like that, only sometimes it'll be a favorite memory. It might be a favorite component or a favorite mechanism. The idea being, I'm going to assume you've heard about these games in some levels. You know, some of them I've done deep dive reviews of. Some of them I've talked about endlessly to the point of boredom for you. And so I thought maybe just a top 50 list that has a slightly different way of talking about the games on it would work. I'm going to talk about the list over the next 8 episodes because generally I'm going to give myself about 15 minutes to do an eighth of the list, and I'll work my way through it that way. Probably the first few episodes will have more games that I'm covering to give me time to talk about the games at the top of the list in more detail. So that's my plan for the next 8 episodes of Pick Up and Deliver, which I expect to record one a day during the week. So I will probably finish those sometime late next week or early the following week. And then I'll take a week or 2 off and then start the new season. So that's how the top 50 list is going to be revealed. I will mention, for those of you who might be curious, both to help you avoid spoiling a thing, but also give you the chance to spoil it if you want, the new top 50 list that I'm going to be talking about is already available to see over on Board Game Geek. The way that I do my top 50 list, I updated it, and the old 2019 list is in the comments of the top 50 list. So if you want to know my old top 50 list from 2019, you can go there and look at the comments. But the new top 50 list is the current one, my geek list called My Top 50. So don't go over there if you don't want to spoil the revelations here. If you don't mind, you can go look. It's over there on Board Game Geek. You should be able to find it by going to user Wombat929 and looking at my geek lists. All right, with that out of the way, what I'm going to talk about today, 2 things. First, I'm going to talk about how I updated the list. What did I do to go through the list and sort it? what parameters did I use for deciding which games could or couldn't be on the list, and ultimately how did it come out. And then I'm going to talk about, generally, without much detail, which games dropped off the list. So that's the overall arc here. So how did I make the list? The first thing I did is I went to Board Game Geek and I downloaded a spreadsheet of all games that I've played. Now this is a change. I think in the past I tried to stick mostly to games I own, but I thought this time it would be interesting to see if I allow games I've played but don't own to get into the mix, how would that change what games end up? Now I will say there were a few games on the list that I didn't own and never have, so I must not have held to that line very strongly. I sort of feel like before I took a list of all the games I own, and then I thought about games I'd played that I thought were really good, and I kind of added them in. I cherry-picked, added them in. So I think that's how I did it before. What I did this time is I downloaded the spreadsheet from Board Game Geek of every game I've played. And once I had that spreadsheet, I alphabetized it, and I added a column at the beginning of the spreadsheet, and I just put in Y or N. And what I did is I just scrolled through the entire spreadsheet, just putting a Y or an N in front of the game. And basically the filter I was using there was, at a glance, do I think it's possible this game could land in my top 50? And my goal was to go from, I think I had a list of 900 or something games, maybe a little bit more than that were in the collection that I had played, and I wanted to filter it down just to the games that it seemed likely I would have played. So I was being pretty vicious with the Ys for yes, it could be in the top 50, because I wanted that list to be as small as I could, but I also didn't exclude any games that I thought it was reasonable that they might end up in the top 50. So on that pass, I ended up eliminating about 3/4 of the list, maybe a little more than that. I ended up with like 130 games or so in the yes column. Many of these were games that were most of the games that were in my top 50 before were still there. I don't know that any didn't make it. It's possible. And then there were quite a few more as well. Then with that list, I went through just quickly and I asked myself a bit more brusquely, is it possible this game, how likely is it this game is going to get in the top 50? Because the sorting engine I was going to use has you do tons of comparisons, and the comparisons are based around the idea of rating all of the games that you put in there against each other, and so the more games you have in there, the longer it takes. So I think I whittled 10 or 15 more games out that way, just where I said, I'm very confident this won't make the top 50. Gone. So then I had around 110 left, and I took that list of 110 and I put it into the board game ranking engine at PubMeeple. Now this is something that many people are familiar with, many people use. PubMeeple is a handy website where they talk about board games and beer. I don't care about the beer part, but the board game stuff is fun. And they have this tool that they've made called the Board Game Ranking Engine. And it's really slick. What you do is you put in a list of games, and then you hit rank. And then what it does is first off, it estimates how long it's going to take you to do this. I think with my list of 110, it estimated something like 470 comparisons, which is a lot, but I was doing it while I watched a video, so I just kind of had it on the side and did it. And most of the answers were pretty easy. Every now and again, a comparison would come up that took a little more thought, but then I just let it sit there. And they have a feature now where you can save it and come back to it later, so it worked out great. So anyway, I put these games in there, and then what it does is it brings up 2 of the games on the list and says which one's better. And then you click which one you think is better, and then it brings up 2 more. And you click which do you think is better, and it just keeps doing that. A lot of the times, once it's sort of hit its stride, when you have 2 that you think you click one that you think is better, then it will bring up a different one, but leave the one that you said was better there. Or sometimes it'll go the other way. You click the one that you think is better, and it leaves the worst one and brings up a comparison. So sometimes it'll do 2 or 3 in a row of the same game. But having gone through that a couple times, or having gone through that eventually got to the point where it had my ratings. Now, I did fudge it a little bit in a couple ways. One, as I was going through, I did delete a couple games from the list. You could always, whenever you have a comparison, you always could just delete a game, say, no, I don't want this in the ranking anymore. And I had a couple times where, as a game came up, I realized, yeah, this game there's no way it's making my top 50. At which point, it's silly to keep rating it because I'm not really using it to rate the bottom 100 and to rate a top 100 or anything like that. In part because I am too flighty. I think this top 50 that I made is pretty reliable, except I think next week it could have changed significantly. Not dramatically, not all 50 games are changed out, but rather the individual rankings of particular games will go up and down with my whim. So this is a snapshot of my feelings at the end of December about board games. There are also a couple places where, when the list was done, I changed the results a little bit because, for whatever reason, however the algorithm worked out, when the list was done, I then examined it and said, is this truly my list? And there were a couple of places where there was a game that I thought should be much higher than it was, or where a game should be lower than it was, etc. So I did use that as a starting point, but then I tweaked it a little bit here and there. But always using the idea of, which game do I think is better? Which game do I like better? And maybe that's actually the better way to understand this. Which game do I like better? Because this is not a rating of the inherent quality of the game. It's how good the game is as a fit for what I want to get out of playing games. So that's what we're going to find when you review my top 50. So I did want to give you a little content from the list, and that's the last thing we're going to do today. I have a list of all the games that dropped off the list. These are games that were in my top 50 before, and now they are not in my top 50. And I've grouped them into a couple categories. First off, we have games that I think that dropped off, I would say, because I don't get an opportunity to play them. Most of these games are games that I think could still be on my top 50 if I played them regularly, but because I don't, they've fallen in my estimation. I'm just not as familiar with them, so I don't rate them as highly. And that is Pulsar 2849, Arctic Scavengers, Coimbra, Empires of the Void 2, Mansions of Madness, Fury of Dracula, and Euphoria: Build a Better Dystopia. Each of those games I play so rarely. In fact, I don't think I've played any of them since last time I did my top 50. Next up, we have games that I love, but my family doesn't. And so my opportunity to play them is really limited, and thus they've fallen in my estimation a bit. That would be Dungeon Pets, Galaxy Trucker, A Few Acres of Snow, and Via Nebula. Then the third category I wanted to point out to you are games that I've played out. And played out is a bad phrase because both of the games in this category are games that I still really like. I am happy to play when I get a chance, but I feel like I have played the breadth of their competitive space, and so they've lost some of their luster for being kind of samey. And that's Century Golem Edition and Transatlantic. Now, Transatlantic I really enjoy, but when I play it with my wife, or I'm playing it right now on yukata.de, I'm having a good time, but it doesn't feel like I'm flexing the same kind of thinking muscles that I still feel like I'm doing with Concordia, for example. And then finally, I have a couple games that fell off my list that don't really fit into categories, or categories that would mean multiple games. And that, first off, we have Detective: A Modern Crime Story. I thought that was really good. I haven't really played any of the sequels, and the longer I'm away from it, the more its flaws stand out rather than its successes. You know, with Sherlock Holmes, the longer I go between playing games of Sherlock Holmes, the more I like about what you get out of that game. With Detective, it's the other way. So, and then we have the networks. The networks could have been put into the category of games my family doesn't want to play, but to be honest, I haven't pushed to play them. So I think that's a game I just need to get back out, because I think it would go over well. And then finally, this one's a little sad to admit it's fallen off my top 50, but Last Night on Earth. Last Night on Earth is a Ameritrash zombie game about killing zombies. It's fun, it's goofy, I like it a lot, but I don't like it enough to leave it in my top 50. So if you were counting, that's quite a few games that have fallen off of my top 50, which means there's room for a whole lot of new games in my top 50 that weren't there before. So the next 8 episodes should be pretty exciting as I reveal those and talk a little bit about why they're among my favorite games, and looking forward to sharing that with you. But that's the end of my walk for today, so the rest of it will have to wait until next time. And if you want to share your thoughts on this process or your top 50, head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269, where we'll be talking about those things together. Thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.